Welcome, friends, family, and connoisseurs of all things waffle related and ramblings. We're now on to blog 16, dated 12th of June 2022. And thanks very much, just for joining in and listening to all my ramblings. Not much has been happening because I'm off work, as anybody who's sort of like been following this for all of those episodes. Um, and it's been a bit of a strange week, but we'll get to that in a bit. Haven't done too much on the news because I'm not listening to anything when I'm going to work. But just to let you know, the war that continues. Putin has hinted that he's going to increase pressure by attacking fringe countries around Ukraine after he commands the Ukraine country. Well, I knew that this was going to happen. This is dangerous speak as far as I'm concerned. My thoughts are always with the Ukrainians, and let's get this battle finished with. It's ridiculous. Now, fuel. I'm a little bit concerned about fuel because there will be a time where I either have to go back to work or I'm going to need to go to a new place of work. Now, I could be going for a hybrid job. I could be going for a job that actually is in a building. It could be remote working. Not sure. But as a lot of people know, to fill up your car now, depending on how many gallons your car takes, I think mine is in the 40 mark, 45 mark. The price of fuel has now gone beyond £100 to fill up your car. Now, it used to be that if I filled up my car, I would possibly get about 2 weeks worth of driving. That's £200 of your wages just to get to work. And I believe I'm in the lower band of that, where a lot of people actually are spending 300, 400 to get to work. And then you have to think of those poor other people that drive every day for a living, lorries, taxi drivers. It's just ridiculous. Apparently thefts from forecourts and private thefts of cars are on the up. Now, this is a concern because apparently there are joyriders that are now attacking private cars that are battery operated to do joyriding, and those cars are damn expensive for the majority of them. Joyriders are also stealing normal cars just to filter out the fuel. So they'll put a pipe down your fuel tank and steal the fuel out of it. And then there is the forecourt thefts. Now, I find it a bit weird, forecourt thefts, because I believe most car forecourts, they drain the batteries and take the fuel out, and most of the time they'll take the cars round the back of the place and repark them every morning. But apparently it's a thing now, and this is just going to escalate. We all know what it's like when suddenly there's a hint that you can't buy a loaf of bread. We all go freezing like 15 loaves in the freezer and stuff, and stacking up on toilet rolls and stuff. So society is really becoming a dystopian society. Anyway, on the better news, if you are thinking about taking a break this week, the heat is going to increase to 27 degrees apparently by Friday. It's a nice sunny day today. It's probably why I'm a bit wishy-washy with my camera, because of how the light works in my room. But that's about it for the news. Great, out the way in under 5 minutes. So, what have I been watching, and what have I been listening to in regards to people that watch this channel? So, obviously, one of my stay puts is Mainmeister. Now, Mainmeister is starting to increase his output a little bit. He did his watch with Mainmeister. That was quite fun. and his waffle was a good waffle this week, because he started talking about timelines. Now, whenever somebody starts rambling on about timelines, I tend to have an objective point of view because I've got my own. And Maymeister is a little bit older than me, actually quite a lot. But his timeline should sort of equal mine. And I was listening to it quite closely, and we skew-iffed a little bit around the time where he was moving from the Amiga to a PC. And I think the reason for that would be is that I got my Amiga slightly earlier, and I moved to therefore the PC slightly earlier, and that meant that his nostalgia point of view for his Amiga is a little bit different to mine, because I moved away from the Amiga and went to the PC a little bit earlier. So, and then there were a few consoles while I had a PC. The thing was about consoles was that they were so expensive, I only bought a couple of games. But the PC I kept upgrading and upgrading and upgrading. So cash started to become a little bit tight because I had more than one machine, which was a little bit beyond the norm for about 8 years of me on computers. Because when I had a Commodore 64, I had just that machine. And when I had an Amiga, I had just that machine for the longest part of the time. I did still have the Commodore 64 for the first year of me having an Amiga, but I moved on from the Commodore 64 totally into the Amiga after about a year. So you're looking at the back end of 86, early 87, because I had an A1000. So definitely check out Maymeister. And then I watched a little bit of Down the Rabbit Hole, like I do. Now, he brought out 2 videos this week. One was about an Xbox game, and the other one was about a Game Boy Advance game. Both of those, well, the Xbox I've got more familiarity with because it was a major console I bought. We are talking about the very first Xbox before the 360. And he was playing a game called Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, I think it was called. And like his, it didn't take too long before I firmware hacked it so that I could play more games from other areas, and yes, some pirated stuff because I could download my own. So yes, I had quite a big collection, and I remember why I did my Xbox and firmware changed it. I just bought a house, so I rented a house in Manchester for the first year, and it was costing a fortune because it was in a place called Didsbury, which is where all the footballers apparently live. It's a very expensive area of Manchester to live in. And I then moved to a place called Northern Moor, which is near Sale and Altrincham, and much cheaper. And but I had a mortgage and I was paying for the house by myself, and it was a 3-bedroom mid-terrace. So with the electric and the rates and everything else, I tended to find that a little bit like what Maymeister was saying when it came to pocket money, where he said he probably had about a tenner a month. I wasn't far from that. I was working for Lloyd's Bank. It wasn't a particularly high-paid job, but it wasn't the cheapest. Bog standard, how much you get an hour is just about the national rate type role. So, because I'd been in that role at that point for 10 or 11 years. So, of my 16 years working for Lloyd's Bank. So, he was talking about V-Rally 3 on the Game Boy Advance. And I had a Game Boy Advance, but for the shortest amount of time. In fact, I really only played Game Boy Advance stuff when I bought a DS. So that's when I started to appreciate the Game Boy Advance a little bit more. And that was because, again, I could play games on backup cartridges. Um, he then he did do an interesting one the week before, which I didn't talk about, which is, again, my love of Star Trek comes in. So, of course, whenever he starts going on about Star Trek, he started talking about the command structure, and he had his lovely Captain's original series top on, and he was explaining about how the command structure worked in Star Trek. Now, if you've ever been interested in that, definitely pay that a channel watch, because I didn't really think about it too much. I know Gene Roddenberry didn't want to think of them as being too militaristic, but of course they do have lieutenants and ensigns and all that sort of stuff. So he must have had some sort of thoughts on it, and Down the Rabbit Hole covers that quite well. Ponder. So Colin has been doing his normal high score kerfuffle, and I think he's been playing on something called QB3. I think it's an unreleased arcade game. Now, I could only watch so much of it because I'm not really into too much of that type of watching, but I did watch a good half hour of it. And this game's quite interesting because it's vector graphic, apparently not released, and it's based on a cube. So if you can imagine the game Robotron being a twin stick shooter where you move and you fire in all directions. This is a shoot 'em up done on each face of the cube. So the aim of it is to collect an item from the center of the screen, which in this case were a dollar symbol, and then shoot all of the creatures so that you got the major bonus, and then go to the edge of the cube where it would then flip, and you repeat for all the sides of the cube. Quite an interesting concept. Trouble was, the more I was watching it, the more I was looking at how the coder had written the game, whether those were really attached to the side of the cube, or whether because it sometimes looked like it was the frame of a window where the creatures were moving around, and as you shot them they got smaller, or they started off large and get smaller. It looked like they were going into the cube if you weren't watching, probably like playing the game. So I was watching it, and the more I was watching it, the more it looked like all these spotted aliens, that they're in the center of the cube. They're not actually on the face. A very, very visual thing to me. So, but he was doing really, really well, and I wish him good luck with it because it looked damn hard. And then, of course, I mentioned about our new person doing some content, Steve. So 8-Bit Steve has been playing some games. He's done some Commodore 64 ones this week, some MSX titles this week, and some Atari 2600s. I sort of have a major bent towards the Commodore ones, and he had Ghetto Blaster on, and that brought back some lovely memories of some other games like Seaside Special and Poster Paster and Lazy Jones. All of those types of games suddenly came back and made me think about how some games were really unique to the Commodore 64 and wouldn't have worked anywhere else, and they tended to be sort of ones with music in. So definitely give those a watch. So then I do my little bit of a shout out. So I've had quite a few people. Mark whatever, big shout out to him. Steve 8-Bit Gaming, Martroid, Jambon, Milfy Swimbuckle, Colin Jones, Colin Ferguson, Down the Rabbit Hole, Cauldron, Steve Paperboy, Highlander, Panther, and Craig Flanagan. Now, it was a little bit more tricky this week to do those shout outs because I did a little bit more of extra content. So I started to do some little shots of me playing some gameplay because some people have wanted me to do that for quite some time. And I was talking in the Sunday stream about a game called Remote Life. I thought it was called Retro Life for some unknown reason. I couldn't read my own writing. Remote Life, which was an R-type-ish type game. And it came, because I send links to people like Panther and Mainmeister. I never know whether they actually get to go and look at those YouTube channels. So I thought to myself, do you know what? Why don't I go and buy it and have a little bit of a play? So on Sunday, I did exactly that after the Sunday stream. And then on Monday, I started to think about how I was going to capture this gameplay. And then when I actually loaded it up, I played 1 or 2 games of it, and then just took inspiration and hit the record button and said, right, if I die, I die. And quite pleasantly surprised. So, you know, I hope I showed enough footage to give encouragement to play some of these games. This one I think is a little bit too expensive. I would wait for a sale. But I do remember reading one comment where they've bookmarked it for a PlayStation download, and another one who's gone out and bought it for his Xbox One, I believe he's got, an Xbox X possibly. And I hope you get some enjoyment out of it. It's definitely a niche game because it really needs a high score table. Hasn't got a high score table. So it has got some replay problems, I think, later on. And the other game that I did was the Sentinel. Now, I love the Sentinel, and I play a lot of emulation. But I did remember that when I moved away from Manchester and came home and I set up my PC again, it was around about 2007. I looked and found a copy of a rewritten version of the Sentinel called Zenith. So I downloaded that, played it. It wasn't finished then, and then sort of moved on. These things tend to happen to me all the time. So when I've been starting to watch a few videos now of people playing the Sentinel, just for various reasons, like it's the 40th anniversary of the Commodore 64, so somebody's chosen a random game, and the Sentinel was one, or somebody's doing a BBCB retrospective, and all of a sudden the Sentinel comes on, and of course the Amiga Mini has just been released and has got the Sentinel as part of its 25 games. So it reminded me of that game, and I thought, well, I'll do a little bit of a playthrough, because some people have difficulty understanding the game, and I tried to simplify what it was all about. I hope I did a good job of that, because I've never found it difficult. It's a King of the Hill game. You've got to dethrone the person on the top of the hill. Yes, the method of how you do that is tricky, but that's the game. It's not really difficult at all. So we've got some questions. Okay, so Colin Jones has asked, what was my first console and computer, and did I have a lot of joy with them? And that's a difficult one, because I'm not sure if it meant by owned or my exposure to computers, because my exposure to computers was at school, where they were Apple IIes and Commodore PETs. But my first computer I bought was a ZX80, that virtually in the same year went up to a ZX81. And while that was going on, and computers were pretty much still in their infancy around that time, my sister was working in a computer store. So she was selling the computers at the time, which were the Atari 800, the Atari 400, and some of the fringe machines like VIC-20, Oryx, that sort of thing. And they were selling business IBM PCs. So she would bring back broken machines that were traded in. If you wanted to buy a bigger PC, like the PC side rather than the Ataris, you could trade in your Ataris and your Oryx and so forth. And they brought them in, and I was at school doing electronics, so I made it a sort of like a mission of a sort to take those into school with me and work on them when school finished, because you could go to electronic class in the afternoon, and I didn't have to walk far to get home. So I was fixing them and then selling them on, and that's what made me get my Commodore 64 and Amiga, because I got quite a pot of cash doing that. And I remember that's how I funded my Atari 800. But what was my first computer and first console then? So I'd have to say it was the ZX80 for the computer, although I don't consider me ever having a computer until I got my VIC-20. I don't know what it is. It's keyboards. I'm a snob. That was my sort of like Travelator keyboard, was my Atari 800 and VIC-20. And when it comes to console, well, of course, I went through the Pongs, you know, Pong and football and squash. But the Atari 2600 in 1979 for me. End of 78, beginning of 79 was when I got my Atari 2600. So I hope that answers your question, because I got massive amount of joy. If you can imagine, I was just over the 10 age. And so, you know, like 10, 11, 12-ish when that was going on. I think it's Colin Ferguson next. He's noticed that I've stopped talking a little bit about Laserdisc, but wanted to know about whether I played Laserdisc arcade games or what my thoughts were of them. Now, I live in a smaller town and only saw arcade games really when the travelling fair or I went to the seaside. But they did have a Laserdisc game later on, after all the praise of Dragon's Lair and Space Ace were out. And I don't remember what the title of it was called, because they had two arcade games. One looked like a Buck Rogers ship, and I swear it had Battlestar Galactica type overtones to it. And there was one where you travelled down a tunnel. It was the same sort of ship, you know, a computer-generated ship with proper video coming at you. But you were going down a tube. And while you were going down this tube, which looks incredible, by the way, the tube, there were holes in the tube, and you pulled down to go down the tube, and then it would speed the video up, and then you'd come up later on down the tube. I don't know what that game is quite. I can easily find out the Battlestar Galactica one, because I think that's a well-known one, and I think it was by Sega. But it could have been called Tube Panic, something like that, I'm not sure. I'm not a big fan of Laserdisc arcade games. They had their place, I can understand, and they had a wow factor. But anybody who did play Dragon's Lair in the arcades know it was, when does a flash move the joystick in a certain direction, left, right, up, down, and it was watching a cartoon. It was more enjoyable to watch, I think, than it was to play, especially when I heard the amount of swearing coming out of people that were playing it. And so Panther has come along and said, was I a single machine user or a multiple machine user back in the day? And I think I've sort of like answered that, Panther. I'm sorry, but it's just, it was very close to the others. I was more a single user for a biggest amount of time. So I did have my Commodore 64, and only a Commodore 64, for a good chunk of the 5 years that I had my Commodore 64. And I did just have an Amiga for the biggest amount of time that I had the Amiga for, but there was an overlap in the middle of me having both a Commodore 64 and an Amiga. In the early days, it was multiple machines because I was fixing them. And later on, it was multiple because I'd moved on to PCs, and for quickness, I bought the odd console just so that I could power something on and play something that was a bit more arcadey than the stuff that I was playing on the PC, which was a little bit more RTS and role-playing game type thing, which didn't really suit consoles terrifically well. They did, but they didn't. And the last question, I think, is from Milfy. Now, he asks always complex, interesting questions, and I'll try to go through this as best as I can, Milfy. But you've asked the question again about, have there been TV shows, games, and films that I have liked, but generally, no, that I have disliked, but considered generally liked by critics or normal people. So I split this up into 3, and it's not a particularly good list because I have a problem with the word dislike. There are obviously things that I dislike, and then later on I'll do a U-turn because I'll listen to one thing and it will make me change my whole outlook on things. But when it came to TV, when it comes to dislike, it's more modern stuff now, more than the stuff that I think retrospectively of, because I can't think retrospectively of something that's really, really bad, because I'll have a nostalgia point of view. But I watched a TV show just recently that was based on the film Omen, which was called Damien, and I didn't like it one bit. Once you get past the film and it's all about, and what it was all about, making a TV series of it didn't seem like a greatest of ideas. I think it got critical acclaim. I think a lot like Dexter, Damien did well, but not for me. I didn't like it too much. And I like my comedies, but there's one that as soon as it's on TV, I turn it over and go, I am not watching that. And that's that How I Met Your Mother. I don't know what it is about that show. It's just, I cannot get into it one bit. I don't find it funny, for one thing. But the whole premise of it, How I Met Your Mother, and the backstory of How I Met Your Mother, and some narrator, that's talking about that point. And I believe that's How I Met Your Father now or something. It ran for seasons and seasons and seasons. So it must have been liked. But no, I do not find that funny. Films. Now, this will probably come as a bit of a surprise, but I've not been able really to find much enjoyment in a film called The Big Lebowski. Now, that probably knocks people sideways, but I've tried to watch it. There are some funny lines in it. Maybe it's the setting, I don't know, but I can't get through that film. Just really can't. And then an easy one, because I want to pass over that, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people now going, oh, I'm turning him off. The Twilight movies. Oh my God, I hate them. I so dislike the Twilight movies. I just don't see anything in them. Really don't. Awful. Awful. And I've not watched ever one of them. Now, when it comes to games, this is the hardest subject, because I've always found something to enjoy in a game. Doesn't matter what it is. So when somebody likes something and then you dislike it, I think I'd probably concentrate on the arcades. And I'm going back to an argument that happened in Discord a couple of weeks ago, and say I have the greatest amount of trouble probably in the arcades of playing puzzle games compared to our other shoot 'em up and beat 'em ups and all of those types of games. Because as much as I really love puzzle games, and I do, I've played Puzzle Bobble, Buster Move, all of the, the Tetrises, all of those types of games, I don't think they suit the arcades one bit. I can play Clacks on the Amiga, and I can play it at home, and I can get great enjoyment out of it. I just can't see myself putting coins in to play those games. Maybe I'll revisit that, but I would say that's probably the closest you're going to get to an answer from me. So let's get on to me a little bit. It's been a bit of a tricky week. I've rewritten my CV. I've started to put my CV on a few sites out there, and I'm worried really in the fact that not a lot is moving in 2 weeks, but there's another 2 weeks to go before really I have to think about work again. So we've had that out the way. Let's talk about a subject of games I used to play. So we'll go through these just very quickly. Now, when I bought my PC, I still tried to keep my arcade roots there. So basically, I bought some real rough, horrible pieces of software that really I shouldn't have bought. So there is an arcade game called Sinistar. I'm sure a lot of you arcade bods out there know the game. And the terrible thing about when you buy a PC and you bought yourself a new graphic card, you're looking for that super flashness. And Sinistar was made into a 3D shooter. There's the box for it. Sinistar Unleashed by THQ. That should have told me something. The graphics didn't look too bad. I was really looking forward to the speech, with the I hunger and all of that sort of stuff. It's a nice little presented gatefold. Is it a good game? What a load of tosh. and it weren't cheap either. So I really suffered that month when it come to what I was going to be buying that month and what I could afford after I bought this piece of top. Now, because I couldn't buy too much, I tended to buy stuff which you had to read a massive great manual for or had some depth. This is one that I remember playing quite a bit called Star Siege, which this one includes the tribes. I did buy Star Siege by itself and tribes separately as well, but I lent out one of those and I never got it back. So I went out and bought this. It's sort of like I don't know if you know about those mech type games. The one thing I will tell you about it is they come with bloody big manuals that you had to read and quite a few discs to go along with it. The thing about it is it got quite good reviews, but it didn't sell. The biggest problem with a game like this, and you've got a series as well called Mech Warrior, is that you've got to have a base to sell your stuff at, and it didn't sell very well at all. But it got praise for its speed and the graphics in general, but the landscapes were just so barren because it was set in deserts basically, or snow. You know, I mean, if you can imagine, the most boring landscape you could think of is probably going to be the desert or snow. You know, hills gliding over them, running over them in a mech warrior thing, and then you come across the construct that you're supposed to blow up, and then it suddenly starts to become hectic. So I remember playing that. That was a good game. That was a good buy. And then there's my love of RTS, and so if anything had Star Trek on it and it was a bit RTS-y, I bought Star Trek Armada, and this was quite a successful series. I think there was a Star Trek Armada 2. There might have even been a 3. But I grew out of these a little bit when a game called Sins of the Solar Empire came out. Now, when Sins of the Solar Empire came out, I pretty much stopped playing spacey RTS games because I don't think you could beat Homeworld. But that game just about did it. So Homeworld was a thing for me as well. But Star Trek Armada was quite good because the nice thing about having a theme around a TV series is that you get the sound effects and the music from the show, which is a bonus. And although they get most of the game wrong, there's lots of enjoyment. Activision did really well, I think, with their licenses a little bit later on. And then there is the role-playing game. So, of course, I bought all of the Baldur's Gates and the Planet's Gate Torments, but I'd sometimes come across a little gold gem. One of them was Darkstone, which is by the French company DSI. Now, I'd followed DSI a little bit, and what was different about this one was that it used, at that particular point in time, very simplistic polygonal characters compared to, you know, generated characters. But it was light sourced. So if you were in a dungeon and there was a light on the wall, it shimmered, and it only gave so much light around, and you could rotate everything around along a 180 degree, you know, a 360 degree plane. So you couldn't go up and down too much, but around it was great. And it sort of had that effect of if you rotated around and you cut to the corner of a house, you could see the inside of the house sort of in a ghosty fashion. It was intentional, it wasn't clipping. So that was definitely one that I got a lot of fun out, Darkstone, and I believe it came out on the PS1 as well. And then when it comes to RTS games that I played an awful lot, Imperium Galactica 2, which came on 3 discs and was basically computer rendered all the way through, was fantastic, and I just loved the soundtrack in it as well. I played this to death. It was probably a game I played for about a year and played it on and off in that year. But when I played it, I was on it for a good month before I'd moved on to something else. And if I came back to it, I was playing it for another month. It was that sort of depth that I liked. And then brought this out, StarCraft, to explain a little bit something in regards to boxes. Now you'll probably notice that, oh, that's the back of the box, by the way. You got an awful lot in StarCraft. I have a big problem when it comes to storage. So I've got a homework question to you all. How do you store your stuff? Because I'm really having a difficulty now. I've just shown you some big box games, right? Yeah. But then let's talk about videos for a second, right? So a standard 4K disc will come in that sort of size. When you get to a steel book, it's sort of the same. And then they'll do these digibooks, which are sort of a little bit bigger, and you're going, right, how am I going to store that on my shelves, right? And then there'll be one that comes along with a load of art cards and books in it, and they'll do, so I've shown you this before the game, and then you put that to that, and you're going, right, so now I've got an even bigger problem. And then you'll buy series of stuff, and you'll buy a whole season 1 of something, which then comes along with about 7 seasons of it, and you're finding, right, this now is starting to become a bit of a problem for me. And then you'll buy a complete series of something, like Cheers, and you'll go, oh right, okay, so now I've got an unwieldy box like that, and I've got that, but it doesn't seem to be too bad. But again, it's taller than that box. So what am I going to do about that? And then there'll be the, oh, I'm a collector, so I've got to have the most deluxe version of a film. So I'll buy the first Spider-Man film in a collector's gift set. And then you've got a problem, because you put it that way with the writing going with it, and then it doesn't work with that. And then, well, I think you get the picture. Now, if you times that by how many times we bought a big box version of a PS3 game or an Xbox game, and then to the normal standard snap cases, and then you buy your CDs and you've got a vinyl collection, and so forth and so forth. How the hell do you store your stuff? Because I'm really struggling now with how to put this stuff away. So I'd like to know. And then to end it all, what's come this week? As you know, I'm broke. I've got to really save some cash. These are all pre-orders, by the way, which I have gone down now and started to cancel a lot of stuff, just in case. But these were the ones that came this week. So a classic Bridge on the River Kwai limited edition steelbook. It is the 65th anniversary, which is funny because in the same week, Lawrence of Arabia 4K steelbook came out, and it's the 60th anniversary. That David Lean, as a director, fantastic. Didn't half space his films about a bit, and do some absolute classic and Oscar winners. I wouldn't mind every 5 years winning a load of Oscars. Anyway, and then Raiders of the Lost Ark steelbook came in, which is a bit of overkill because I bought the box set, but I hated the covers. So I've started to get these because they're the proper film covers of the steelbooks, which looks so much better. And I'll probably sell the box set because that was the biggest mistake I think I made last year in buying that box set. And that's the end of my waffle. I hope you found some enjoyment. I hope you will go away and do that homework question for me. I haven't done too much on soundtracks. I don't know if anybody really liked that section. I love it. I will try and bring a couple of things in, but it's just that, apart from bringing in the odd soundtrack, which is the same composer, and you're talking about the same composer over and over again, it probably gets a bit boring. So I sort of diminished it down a little bit, but I think I'll bring that back in. Until next week, if you can make it, please do. Please keep sending those comments in, and you really are helping me during this real troubled time, especially as there is no regime for me anymore. I'm not going into work. I'm finding it a pretty lonely, depressing place at the moment, and reading your comments really cheers me up. And I hope you like those game walkthroughs. If you want me to do more of those, just let me know. Speak to you all again soon then. Bye bye.